Good. So this is our discussion of the development of halachic literature. We already discussed in general, the concept of the 13 midot, the 13 methods by which the Torah is interpreted. We saw the story in Masechet Pesachim about Hillel and the elders of Betera when they didn't know the halacha about the Pesach. They asked him, and we saw two different traditions. The traditions recorded in the Babylonian Talmud is that the moment Hillel started interpreting the psukim and deriving the halachic outcome from the pasuk, they listened to him and they accepted his interpretation and they appointed him the Nasi. And the more ancient tradition, that's from the Yerushalmi, says that when Hillel tried to decide the halacha by using midrash halacha, by interpreting the psukim, he was rejected. Every argument that he presented was countered by their arguments, and the only reason that they accepted what he said eventually was that he said, "Kach shamati mipi Shmaya ve'Avtalyon." He said, "I've heard that from my masters," meaning he relied on tradition. So that story of Hillel and the elders of Bnei Betera is, we could say, the shifting point from the tradition that relied on practice and what you knew from your masters to a more creative method of interpreting the Torah using midrash halacha. And of course, it was argued by those who practice midrash halacha that this is the original intention of the pasuk. But as we'll see, there are many different schools, there are many different approaches on how to interpret the pasuk. More importantly, the process of arriving at the halacha is not always clear, meaning it is hard sometimes to see how you start from the text in the pasuk and you arrive at the conclusion. And it seems as if, in many cases, you already know what the halacha is, or you decided what the halacha should be, and you trace it back to the pasuk. Why was it done? Part of it was the intellectual exercise of the rabbis trying to fortify the system that they were developing. And the other part of it was the need to teach people or to prove to people that the system is authoritative. So when people come and ask, how do you know that this is the halacha? They say, because we find it in the pasuk, and they are able to show people how this is written in the pasuk. So we are now going to look at the section from Midrash Halacha called Mekhilta de Rabbi Ishmael. That's the Midrash Halacha on the book of Shemot. And so I picked a section from the Ten Commandments, Lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tignov. So it's in Shemot chapter 20, verse 13. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not steal. And let's see how the Midrash interprets those psukim. So it says here, Lo tirtzach, lama ne'emar, lefi shene'emar, shofech dam ha'adam, עונש שמענו, אזהרה לא שמענו. תלמוד לומר, לא תרצח. You shall not kill. Here, something is missing from the translation. Why is it written? That's the question. Why is it written? Why did the Torah say לא תרצח? Since we already find this text in Bereshit 9:6, one who spills man's blood, by man his blood will be spilled, it tells us of the punishment. Where is the exhortation or the admonition, the warning? You shall not kill. So the Midrash here goes for a formula that argues that you need onesh ve'azhara. In order for a prohibition to be complete, you need to have the prohibition stated and the punishment stated. And if you don't have both, you cannot enforce the law. because someone could say, I did not know that it is forbidden, or I did not know that I will be punished for it. So you need to have onesh v'azhara, and that's part of the way the rabbis create the system to make sure that it is uniform and it has a format. So for each prohibition that is mentioned in the Torah, the rabbis will look for an admonition and the statement of the punishment. But now, what's interesting with this statement here is that we're talking about the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, is the covenant between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is how they are being instituted as a nation. Nothing was said to them before that. So it's hard to understand that question. Lo tirtzah lama ne'emar. Why do you tell people lo tirtzah? Of course you have to say it. That's part of the Constitution. But we go here with a very minimalist approach. Every letter, every word should be there for a reason. So they continue by saying, Lefi shene'emar shofech dam ha'adam. You already learned somewhere else that if you spill men's blood, he who sheds men's blood, by men his blood will be shed, where the Torah specifies a punishment for murder, but we need the admonition, and it's here. Another problem with that midrash is that this verse in Bereshit is addressed to the descendants of Noah and his children after the flood. It is not addressed to Am Yisrael. So as a nation, they have never heard it, not the punishment nor the admonition. But in any case, we'll leave it alone. We're not trying to explain everything here in the midrash, just to show how it works and the problems with it. The next part of the pasuk, lo tin'af, lama ne'emar. Why did the Torah say lo tin'af, that you should not commit adultery? Lefi shu omer mot yumat hanoef ve'hanoafet. In another place in Leviticus 20:10, we have learned the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death, and this tells us of the punishment. Whence the exhortation? Where do we find the admonition? You shall not commit adultery. So the same concept, the same formula, that we need an admonition and we need a punishment, and that's how we have both. One question that is not addressed here: why would the Torah split the admonition and the punishment? It makes no sense. So nobody addresses that from the point of view of the literary structure of the Torah. Why would we have one segment that speaks only of the prohibition and another segment in a completely different book speaking of the punishment? And when we take that together with the previous pasuk, it becomes even more problematic. The admonitions are mentioned together in the book of Shemot. The punishment for murder is mentioned in the beginning of the book of Bereshit, and the punishment for adultery is mentioned in the middle of the book of Leviticus. That doesn't seem very organized. Rather, one should have said, as I said before, the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, is the covenant between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and God, and so those things need to be stated. But again, the Midrash Halacha takes it very literal, minimalist way of understanding, and also ignores the beginning of the pasuk. It says Veish asher yishkav et eshet ish asher yishkav et eshet rayu. In Leviticus 22, the full text says Veish asher in'af et eshet ish asher in'af et eshet rayu. If a man commits adultery with a married woman committing adultery with another man's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. So that's already contained in the pasuk, the admonition. When you say, if you do this, right, this is what will happen. So obviously the prohibition is included in the pasuk. So we have to deal with this to understand this approach of the Midrash Halacha that looks at the pasuk very sort of locally and tries to show that everything in the text is there for a reason. So now we go to the next part of that pasuk, of that text, in Midrash Halacha. Okay, so we saw looking up. This one is a little more complicated. Okay, so we read this text. Lo tignov, lama ne'emar. You can see the translation at the bottom of the screen. Lo tignov lama ne'emar. Why does the Torah say you shall not steal? Same question, same formula. לפי שהוא אומר, וגונב איש ומחרו מות יומת. Again, here we don't have the full pasuk. It says in Exodus 21:14, one who steals or kidnaps a man and sells him will be put to death. עונש שמענו אזהרה מנין. We learned that there is a punishment, but where from do we know the admonition? תלמוד לומר לא תגנוב. So now we stop and ask, wait a second, לא תגנוב, you shall not steal. In the 10 Commandments, how do you know that it refers to someone who kidnaps another person? Right? And that besides the question that, like the previous pasuk about adultery, when the Torah says, "V'gonef ishum charomot yumat," he who kidnaps a person and sells him will be put to death. The admonition and the punishment are included in the same text. But the attention of the Midrash is to show that there are no superfluous texts in the Torah and that you can learn something from every statement. So we learn that from Lo Tignov. And now we get to this point, that is a prohibition against kidnapping. Lo Tignov. The Midrash Halacha asks, Ata omer legonev nefesh, o eno ela azara legonev mamon. That is another common formula in the Midrash Halacha. When someone derives a statement from the pasuk, they will question. They say, you say it's this, but maybe it's that. You say it's gonev nefesh. You say it speaks about stealing a person or kidnapping, but maybe it's a admonition against stealing money. So the Midrash Halacha, answers, כשהוא אומר לא תגנובו, הרי זה אזהרה לגונב ממון. So the Midrash Halacha answers, I don't need to write in the 10 Commandments a warning about stealing money, because there's already another pasuk that says, you shall not steal. So the admonition against stealing money is already mentioned. מה תלמוד לומר לא תגנוב, בגונב נפשות הכתוב מדבר. So we must say that the word lo tignov speaks about gonev nefashot, he who steals another person or kidnaps. So what have we done here with this Midrash Halacha? What are we doing with this Midrash Halacha? We have two verses that say do not steal, one in the plural, one in the singular. You shall not steal. In the singular is in the 10 Commandments, and you in the plural shall not steal is in Leviticus 19:11. And the Midrash Halacha says one of them speaks about kidnapping, stealing a person, and another one speaks about stealing money. And those are the admonitions. The punishment is mentioned somewhere else. Again, the problem of splitting the discussion of the admonition and the punishment. So now the Midrash Halacha answered the first question. How do you know that we talk here in the 10 Commandments about kidnapping and not about stealing? So it answered this question because we already have that admonition somewhere else. But now another question arises, and that is, harei ze legonev mamon, vehala azara legonev nefesh. But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the lo tignov that is mentioned in the 10 Commandments is about stealing money, and the lo tignovu, you shall not steal, mentioned in Leviticus 19:11, is about kidnapping. So now the Midrash Halacha does not challenge the notion that lo tignov could mean both stealing or kidnapping, but it just asks, how do you know that this is the meaning of each pasuk in its particular context? Amarta tse ulmad mishlosh midot. So now we have a reference to the 13 midot. which might tell us that this is a later part of Midrash Halacha, because as we've seen when I showed you the chart of the appearances of Midot in Midrash Halacha, even though the Baraita speaks about 13 Midot, ב-13 Midot שהתורה נדרשת, in practice, when we search for the occurrences of the usage of the 13 Midot in the Talmudic and Rabbinic literature, which includes Mishnah, Tosefta, Midrash Halacha, Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi, there are only 6 or 7 Midot that are used regularly. So the concept of 13 Midot is pretty late. But in any case, we read here, and I'm saying that it could be the whole paragraph is late, or that it was interjected in a later period. We have problems with those texts. We don't know what is the text or the original text. We can't ascertain that no one over generations, while copying those texts, did not add certain text from somewhere else. For example, if someone studies this text and he feels that a certain discussion on the Talmud, in the Talmud, could shed light on it, he might mark in his copy of the Midrash Halacha in the margin, look up Tractate Sanhedrin, page 20, for example, right? The next person who copies that manuscript looks up Masechet Sanhedrin. He says, it will be helpful if I write the text that my predecessor referred to. I'll copy the whole text in the margin. The next person who copies the manuscript looked at this, I say, oh, this text fits perfectly in the Midrash Halacha, and he will put it in. And that happened throughout history until more or less the 11th, 12th century, when Rabbi Tam made a prohibition, a sort of a decree against correcting texts inside. But it still went on, in a lesser way. So now, what is the thing that we're going to learn from the 13 midot? Here the Midrash says explicitly we need to use the logical methods of interpretation of the text. Shalosh mitzvot ne'emru be'inyan zeh. There are 3 mitzvot in this context. Shtayim meforashot ve'achat stuma. 2 of them are explicit. Ve'achat stuma, and 1 of them is concealed, or 2 are revealed and 1 is concealed. Nilmad setuma mimeforashot. So we will learn the details of the stuma, of the concealed text, from the 2 that are revealed. So let us now clarify what the Midrash is doing here. And what the Midrash is doing, it says, we have 3 mitzvot in this text. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not steal, right? Lo tirtzah, lo tin'af, lo tignov. I know from other texts that were cited here that murder carries the death punishment. I know, again, from another text that adultery carries the death punishment. Therefore, lo tignov, you shall not steal, must also be an offense that carries the death punishment. So it's not an official midah that is referred to here. What is it? Is it binyan av? Is it an analogy? Apparently, it is what is called davar alamed misofo, or davar alamed me'inyano. I assume that if I grouped 3 things, 3 objects, 3 law, 3 halachot in the same pasuk, they all have the same characteristics. So the Torah says, don't do A, B, C, and I know what is the punishment for A and B. I know also what is the punishment for C. But when I look at C and I see that it's you shall not steal, I ask myself, why would there be a death punishment for a theft?
So is it like kind of a deduction reasoning?
Yes, it's deduction reasoning, of course. It's reading, what when you do the comprehension test, psychometric, whatever it is, and you need to read around the text, try to figure out what is the word the one word that you don't understand. Let's say you don't know the word at all. Let's say I didn't know what lotignov is. I don't know how it's translated to Hebrew or any other language. All I know is because of the context that it carries the death punishment, the death penalty. That is the logic of this midrash. What is the flaw? There is a major flaw in this statement. And we should know that flaw because we know the Ten Commandments. We'll look at the first half as, let's just look at the second half of the Ten Commandments. We have lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tignov, lo ta'aneh bere'acha et shaker, and lo tahmod. Or, you shall not commit murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, whatever it is, humans or money. You shall not bear false testimony, you shall not testify a false testimony, and lo tahmod, you shall not covet that which does not belong to you, right? And they are all in one paragraph in the second half of the Ten Commandments. So what will be the problem here? The Midrash focuses only on the three first of these prohibitions and says all of them carry the death penalty. But if you look at the larger group, there's no reason to draw the line between you shall not steal and you shall not bear false testimony and you shall not covet. They're all part of the same deal, the same basket. The Torah handed you 5 prohibitions in one text. You shall not commit murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, or coveting. All these are forbidden. Which one of them we can say for sure does not and cannot carry the death penalty? The
coveting.
Coveting. There's no way that for coveting there will be a death penalty. There's even a debate among the commentator, what is exactly the nature of coveting? If it's just the thought of, I would like to have that which my neighbor or someone else has, it's a thought. A thought cannot be punishable. There's a question if there's a punishment at all. Some say that coveting, and we'll get to that, is desiring something so badly that you force the owner to sell it to you. And let's say that this happened, what will be the punishment for that? It could be something that is not improper. It's not the right thing to do, but it's hard to say that it's punishable. So the problem that I have with this midrash is that it deliberately severs the last 2 mitzvot in the second part of the Ten Commandments, and groups only the 3 first together and says, okay, if lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, murder and adultery carry the death penalty, so the third one must carry that death penalty as well. And for that reason, it refers to kidnapping. And the amazing thing to me is that when I talk to people who study in yeshivot and went to Jewish day schools, etc., they automatically and naturally read the lo tignov as kidnapping. Oh, everybody knows it speaks about that. It says, how do you know that it speaks about kidnapping, right? So that's the problem of not reading the Torah in context and looking at the midrash and asking those questions. Let's go back to this midrash. Lo ta'aneh bere'acha et shaker lama ne'emar. Now, there is this pasuk that says you should not bear false testimony. Why is it mentioned? Again, the same question, same formula. לפי שהוא אומר, ועשיתם לו כאשר זמם לעשות לאחיו. The full text says, וכי יקום כי יקום עד חמאס באיש לענות בו שרה. If a man appears against another to testify maliciously and gives false testimony against him, ודרשו השופטים היטב, and the magistrates shall make a thorough investigation and find that the man is a false witness, ועשיתם לו כאשר זמם לעשות לאחיו וביערת הרע מקרבך, you shall do to him as he schemed to do to his fellow, Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. והנשארים ישמעו וייראו, ולא יוסיפו לעשות עוד כדבר הרע הזה בקרבך. Others will hear and be afraid, and such evil things will not again be done in your midst. So, first of all, it's obvious that in this paragraph there is a warning. And the Torah says if a false witness comes and testifies against another, he will be punished. So that is an admonishment, an admonition. But still, the Midrash Halacha is asking here, we don't know that there is, that is forbidden. We just know that it's going to be punished. The Torah says that you shall not bear false testimony against another person. Interestingly enough, the mitzvah of lo tahmod is not even addressed in this midrash, which this is the Mekhilta de Rabbi Ishmael. So I mentioned previously that there are two sets of midrashim on the book of Shemot. One is called Mekhilta de Rabbi Ishmael, and one is called Mekhilta de Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Ishmael were two sages who lived more or less in the same time. They were contemporaries. One of them passed away before the other. Rabbi Ishmael tended more to look at the text logically and consider the vernacular, the way people speak. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Akiva, who was his master, their approach was to show that each word in the text is there for a reason, and therefore their midrash was much more elaborate. For many, many centuries, people thought that there's only one midrash, only one text on the book of Exodus. But later on, with fragments that were found in the Geniza and other manuscripts, scholars were able to piece together those texts that belong to two different schools of thought. So that is one challenge that we have when we look at the Midrash Halacha, that when we read the Midrash Halacha on Shemot, it's unclear who is the author, Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai are of the same school. So is it them or is it Rabbi Ishmael? The other challenge is that over the years, as I said, many texts were added to the Midrash Halacha. And if you, for example, if you decide to go and study that text, Midrash Halacha, the way people study the Talmud, the whole thing, one page at a time, you will find out that a lot of the interpretations and the texts incorporated in this Midrash Halacha are not dealing with Halacha at all, but rather are interpretations of the narrative or other aspects of the Pasuk. So one of the first tasks that one must do when searching to determine a certain Halacha is to look for its source in Midrash Halacha. Where is the first time that it's mentioned and discussed in those texts? Let me pause the recording for a second to see if people have questions. What we're dealing with is the midrashic interpretation of the text. We can offer many different interpretations on how the Ten Commandments are structured, right? Like I just said, I see the first five as saying, these are the gifts that Hashem gave you, and you have to appreciate that. You have the freedom of thought, you have the freedom of religion, you are a free person, you have a family, you have to appreciate that. You have Shabbat, it's a gift, you have to appreciate that. And then the second half says, don't infringe upon the rights of others, don't take their life, their love, their relationship, their possessions, their right to fair trial. And then the end is lo tahmod, you shall not covet. But the rabbis are looking at this text in a very narrow legal point of view. Okay, how do I put all these texts into a very narrow and clear formula? And that's how they arrive at the conclusion that lo tignov speaks about kidnapping, because they want to put it in the same category with murder and adultery. But there's no reason to assume that. We could put prohibitions of a different level of severity in the same pasuk. Yes, Daphna, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have maybe a overly simple question, but where did the division in 5 and 5 come from to begin with?
Good point. So that's a separate question. You are like, it's not about the midrash halacha. It seems that there is first of all, we'll put it this way: there really, even the term 10 commandments is inaccurate. The Torah never refers to the 10 commandments as 10 commandments. It calls it aseret devarim, the 10 issues or the 10 concepts. And I think there are 8 commandments. The first is a statement, I am your God. And the last one is a statement, this is what you're going to achieve. And I wrote about this in another place. And where I do think that this, maybe people felt naturally that this is a sort of once you start saying lo, 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 it's a different structure. It's definitely not about the length. It's not about how much text was written on each side, because the first 5, if we call it that, are much, much longer than, it's like 3 or 4 times longer than the second half. I think that, that sort of seam line, the beautiful blessing, honor your father and mother so you have long life on the land that Hashem gives you. That was like, okay, the end of part 1. Now we get into the serious business. Don't do this and this and that. When I got to my understanding of this text, as I said, the gifts that Hashem gives you, and the appreciation of what other people have, I searched for a sort of a textual proof for that, and I found it. And I think it's right there. If we take the first word of what I call the first half, and the last 2 words of it, it starts with the word Anochi Hashem Elohecha. I am Hashem your God. It ends with the words on the land that Hashem gives you, and in Hebrew it's Noten Lach. So if you take only the first word and the last 2, you would read Anochi Noten Lach. I give you, meaning the emphasis is this is what you have. Appreciate your gifts. If you look at, and then if we take the first letter of the second half, which is Lo, and the last 2 words do not cover that which belongs to other, Asher L'Re'echa, it says Lo Asher L'Re'echa. So I could distill the whole 10 commandments to the first word and the last 2 of each part, and it would be Anochi Noten Lach Lo Asher L'Re'echa. And then, but then we go to the moral and ethical, right? I think it's a beautiful message. But here is the, and then when you look at the Midrash, we sometimes have the feeling that the Midrash drains the text of this spiritual message and becomes very very technical. So before we go to the parallel text in Midrash, in the Mekhilta of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we'll look at one little paragraph for the Midrash of Rabbi Ishmael that speaks about what Nahama asked before about candlelighting, but here it's about the Kiddush for Shabbat. So I'm going back to the mitzvah of Shabbat. So he says, remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it, right? And so the Midrash Halacha says, lekadesho bivracha, to sanctify it with a blessing. Mikan amuru, from here they've ruled, mekadeshin alayayin bichnisato. You have to say kedusha or kiddush over wine when the day enters. En li ela kedusha layom, kedusha lalayla minayin. Now, the translation here is, this tells me only of a kiddush at night. How do I derive a kiddush on the daytime? You see that the text in the Hebrew text doesn't read that. The opposite. En li la kedusha layom, kedusha lalayla minayin. It only tells me that I have to do kedusha on the day. How do I know that you do kedusha at night? So do they talk about the kiddush, or do they talk about the kedusha in tefillah? We'll talk about it in a second. Talmud lomar. Where do I learn from? Ushmartem et Shabbat. You have to guard the Shabbat. Enli ela Shabbat. I only learn Shabbat from here. Where from do I learn that on Yamim Tovim you also have to do Kiddush? Talmud Lomar ele Moadei Hashem, and those are the days of Hashem. Asher tikru otam b'moadam, that you will announce in the right time. So apparently, this midrash gives us the proof text that you have to do kiddush on the wine. Lekadesho, zachor et yom Shabbat lekadesho. Remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it with the blessing. And from here we learn that you have to do kiddush on wine as the day begins. The problem is, if we speak about the beginning of the day, how do we skip to the day, right? Eni la kedusha layom. Also, when they say we learn it from this pasuk, elsewhere in Exodus, ushmartem et Shabbat, you will guard Shabbat, right? So what they're saying is there we have two verses. Why do I need two verses to tell me that I have to sanctify the day? One for the night and one for the day. The question that I would ask, why is it in another part of the Torah? Why doesn't the Torah say it in the same paragraph? Why do we split it over different paragraphs of the Torah? Also, in the very text of the Ten Commandments, we have the word Shamor at Yom HaShabbat, which appears in the one text of the Ten Commandments called Zachor at Yom HaShabbat. Remember, the other word Shamor at Yom HaShabbat. So here we need to speak of a little bit of the background of the halachot of Shabbat, and that's why it's also connected to the question of candle lighting, and that is that when the Torah says, remember the day of Shabbat, lekadesho, to sanctify, it should be translated as to distinguish. Lekadesh is to distinguish, to draw a line, a distinction between the rest of the week and Shabbat. You don't have to do anything on Shabbat. The Torah goes right away to say, how do you distinguish Shabbat? Not actively, passively. You work for 6 days and you cease of work on the seventh. So you don't need to do anything actively on Shabbat. The fact that you cease from work on the seventh day is enough. And especially since the reasoning for that, the analogy is, Kisheshet Yamim Asa Adonai et Hashemayim v'ta'aretz u'vayom ha'shvi'i Shabbat ve'nafash. You have to do it because God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day He ceased from work. It's a passive distinction for the Shabbat. Now, and that's how it was for 1,000 years before the time of the Mishnah, before rabbinical times. There was no specific physical act that was associated with the beginning of Shabbat. You simply stopped to work. You came home, you stopped working, you went to sleep. Yeah, you went to sleep, meaning there was no candle lighting, there was no special meal, there was no kiddush, there was no prayer. And at a certain point, the rabbis realized that the Shabbat is facing a danger of erosion. That slowly people would not really give a they would not have a special way of honoring and respecting the Shabbat, which is a problem that already we can already find in the early prophets. Isaiah in chapter 58 says, "Im tashim mishabat raglecha," you should respect the Shabbat. Yirmiyahu in chapter 17, I think, or 16, fights with the merchants who come and conduct commerce on Shabbat. Nehemiah, at the time of the returning from Zion, the same thing. People had problems observing Shabbat, because if Shabbat is the way the Torah describes it, just cease from work, maybe for the biblical generations it worked. The fact that you don't have to work hard on Shabbat, you come home and you relax, is enough. And maybe in rabbinic times, when you also have an urban and more commercial society, it's not the same. In any case, they felt that what is happening is people come back from work, and they work till the last minute and they go into Shabbat, they grab something to eat and go to sleep. And when we study Mishnayot, when we'll talk about that as well, maybe that would be a good topic to represent the development of halacha. If we look at the Halachot Shabbat as they evolve through time, we'll see that the very first chapters in Masechet Shabbat, in Tractate Shabbat in the Mishnah, give us a hint of what used to be reality before the Mishnah, because they speak about people carrying their tools and their accessories for work up until the last minute. They talk about the tailor. They say a tailor should not go out to the street with the needle stuck in his garments, because that's how they used to carry the needles, because he might do it on Shabbat as well. That means that the tailor worked till the last minute before Shabbat started. Also, the way the rabbis speak about candle lighting, they say that if a woman, one of the reasons that women die when they give birth, which is a problematic Mishnah, which I'll address, maybe in a different opportunity, but they use very harsh terms. They say if women die at childbirth because they fail to light the candles on Friday night. Really? The reason they use such harsh language, I'm not saying they're justified, is because they had a campaign. They were running a campaign trying to convince people to behave differently on Friday night. They don't want people to work till the last minute, come home and collapse on the bed. They want them to give a special nature, special character, special nature for Friday night. How do they do that? By creating the halacha of kiddush. They say kadesheu alayayin, kadesheu b'knisato. So yes, it's written here as a textual derivation from a logical deduction from the text of the Torah, but there's no connection. When we just got used to the word kiddush, right, as something that is associated with wine, but it is not. The kiddush is not really the wine. If you don't have wine, you say Baruch Ata Hashem Mekadesh Shabbat. You are Hashem who sanctified Shabbat. You say it in the Amidah already. You already did kiddush, but the rabbi said no. En kiddush ela bimkom sauda. You have to do kiddush, and meaning you have to state that Shabbat is distinguished. That's the idea of kiddush. The idea of kiddush is not a cup of wine. The idea of kiddush is that I say and I verbalize the message. This day is a distinguished, sanctified day. The rabbi said, okay, don't just say it. First of all, they introduce the idea of saying it, because when you say it, you feel it, you're connected, okay? But they say, we don't want you to just say it. We want to say it by holding a cup of wine. Because wine is a blessing and wine is abundance and all the beautiful things attached to it. But you know what? If you have a cup of wine, right, you should really have a meal with it. It's like if you give a mouse a cookie, right? He will ask. So if you give someone a cup of wine, he will probably ask for a meal. If he asks for a meal, he would like to see what he eats, right? So you need candles. If you have candles, you want to have the table set nicely. People didn't light candles on Shabbat or any other night because it was costly. It was expensive. People live differently. They when it was dark, they went to sleep. We know how there was so much hassle that we went through with the daylight saving time. Every time we switch from winter to summer, right, we lose sleep. I got up this morning at 3:30 a.m., stayed up for an hour, and then went back to sleep. It's crazy, right? And there are a lot of financial losses across the United States and Israel also that does it. Our forefathers, in that sense, were much wiser. They worked long days in the summer and didn't sleep that much. And in the winter, they slept long nights, preserving their energy. Artificial light was used only if extremely necessary. And that's why the rabbi doubled down on lighting candles on Friday night. They said, we want to create an atmosphere on Friday night. When you come home, And when they say, by the way, when you come home on Friday night and they speak of the man and the man comes in and everything is said, he's not coming from shul. We have, today it's so anachronistic. We think, oh, the rabbis were talking, everybody's going, I'm not saying that it's not beautiful, it's lovely, right? We all go back from shul and and you enter the home and it's lit and the tables. They were talking about the man coming back from working in the fields. He's tired, he just wants to pop on the bed and go to sleep. I remember that was me when I was in the army doing basic training, and they would release me for Shabbat because I was married, and I would just come home, do the kiddush, and just go to sleep until the morning that I had to go to shul and read the Torah also, and then go back to sleep. That was what people wanted to do, but the rabbis made them come home and sit together for a meal with candles and wine. That's the backstory, right, of where it all came from. So now when you look at the text that we just read, the rabbis read the pasuk in the Torah, Zachor et yom HaShabbat lekadesho, remember the day of Shabbat and sanctify it. And they say, let's go back to this text. They say lekadesho bibracha. Don't just sanctify it. Don't just say Baruch Mekadesh Shabbat. Do it with the blessing. I mean, do it with a positive attitude, with a positive atmosphere, right? But bibracha is a bracha line. Mikan amru. From here we've learned you say the kiddush over wine when the day starts. This is a classical example of what we call asmachta, meaning an anchor for an existing law. Now, the existing law could be something that exists because of tradition, or that the rabbis now legislate and it became an existing law, but people come and tell them, what do you mean do kiddush over a cup of wine? My father never did that. My grandfather never did that. I drink wine only on festive occasions. On festive occasions, they say, oh, no, it says in Torah, lekadesho, you have to sanctify the Shabbat. It has to be with the blessing, right? Mikan amru, from here we've learned, but really not. We already decided that you have to do kiddush with wine, and we supported with this pasuk. Now, that question, enli la kedusha layom, kedusha lalayla minayin, must be some kind of textual misrepresentation. Should it be enli la kedusha lalayla, kedusha layom minayin? People would say, okay, I understand. So, when we talk about distinguishing Shabbat, making Shabbat special, obviously the seam line is at night, right? According to the Jewish calendar, the day ends, the next day begins with sunset, right? So of course I will have to do Kiddush at night. Why would I do it during the day? But people felt naturally that Kiddush is the right time to do Kiddush is during the day, because that's when you might have a festive meal with a cup of wine, not at night when you just come from work. So they say Kedusha lalayla minayin. Where from do I know that Kedusha lalayla? That's one way to understand it. But historically, it happened the other way around. The Kiddush, to say bracha over wine and say the words Mekadesh Shabbat, was established originally only for the night. But then people said, the rabbis or people said, well, hey, that's disrespectful for the meal of the day. It also wants a cup of wine. So they said, okay, we'll give you a cup of wine. But there's a major difference between the Kiddush of the night and the Kiddush of the day. In the Kiddush of the night, we say a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbat. That's the real Kiddush. Borei Pri HaGefen, whenever you drink a cup of wine, you have to say it. What happens in the morning? First, we say a litany of psukim. We say, V'shameru b'nei Yisrael, im tashim mishabat raglecha, mizmor leDavid, everyone with his text. And then we say, Borei Pri HaGefen. And there's actually a cute anecdote in the Talmud about that. They say that one of the rabbis arrived on Shabbat. He was staying in a certain community. And apparently, that rabbi didn't do Kiddush on Shabbat morning. Or if he did, he would just say, Borei Pri HaGefen and drink the wine. And they and the people asked him, and they say, could you do the great Kiddush for us during the day? They call it Kiddusha Rabbah. Could you do for us Kiddusha Rabbah, the great Kiddush, meaning the glory, the special, the extra Kiddush. Like, so he doesn't know exactly what it is. What is he going to do? So he said, I will start with Borei Pri Gefen. So we're thinking, okay, let's see how I get out of this problem. So he says, Savri Maranan, he says very slowly, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Borei Pri Gefen. And he pauses for dramatic impact and to see what people do. And everybody started drinking. So he realized that's the great kiddush for them, to say this the bracha is enough. And he drank, and he says, he told Allah, see, I'm a wise man. I acted wisely. But people today, see the disparity. People today go crazy over the issue of kiddush bimkom seudah. You have to have kiddush in the morning where you have the meal, and if you didn't have it there, you have to repeat it at home. And if you have, I can't eat before I did that. A lot of complications. But that's how it started. It started by the rabbis wanting to create a special character and an atmosphere for Shabbat, which they succeeded in doing. Later on, it was sequestered by the halachists who wanted to define exactly everything. What is the size of the cup? How much wine should be in it? What type of wine you could use? Are you sitting or standing or dancing or whatever it is? But this is not how it's derived from the text. Anyway, with this we conclude the discussion of just one section of the Midrash Halacha from Mekhilta de Rabbi Ishmael. I'm going to pause the recording and then take more questions for those who want to stay. So give me a second.